Okay, good morning. We are on the bottom of Kuf Yud Beis, 110b. So we're still in the middle of our discussion about zugos, qualifying when, how, and where should one be concerned with consuming foods or even doing activities in pairs, in that this activity invites a negative spiritual energy that can have adverse material consequences for one's health and well-being. We discussed all kinds of things, combining beer and wine, whether they combine for good or for bad, meaning to say, if you had two already, and then you add a third, that would be combining for good. Or if you had one and now you have a second, that would be combining for bad. Some things combine for both, some things combine for one, not the other. We also discussed, this was the last thing we discussed, is whether having a table present separates the drink, breaking it up. And now, I believe this is the Gemara's final comment on the question of zugos. The Gemara's final comment is on, good morning, Alan, is on the type of drink. And then the Gemara is going to get to other activities that invite a negative spiritual energy. So this is where we are. It's the very last line on Kuf Yud Amud Aleph, 110b. The middle of the line, it says, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel.
110b, right?
110b, Kuf Yud Amud Beis. Very last line, Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda taught us in the name of Shmuel. Kol hamazog, any drink that is diluted. As Rashbam explains it for us, as Rashi does as well. If a person drank diluted wine, but again, diluted here doesn't mean in the sense that you ruined the wine, but actually that you perfected it, right?
Back in the day.
Yeah, mazog is diluted is one way to translate it. Another way to translate it to be diluted. Technically, it's correct, but mazog is also like to create a balance, like to create a mixture of two things that create a proper balance. That's like mazog.
What do you call that? Yeah.
Like when you combine two elements to create a proper equilibrium, like proper balance. That's probably the better translation of mazog rather than diluted. Diluted has a negative connotation, like you ruined something. But here it's not. It's where you took two drinks, water and wine, put them together to create the proper maziga, the proper mix. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay, so you had wine like that. That is to say, proper wine that's been properly diluted with water, and then afterwards you drank some other drink, let's say orange juice. That's also been properly diluted. If you have heavy orange juice concentrate,
reconstituted.
Proper constitution. That's correct. You create the proper constitution of that wine. Yeah. Yeah. So if you drank wine like that, and then afterwards you drank, say, orange juice or some other drink, that was also a combination of a high concentration and water.
Taking
concentrate juice with water or the like, then they combine both for good and bad. That is to say, if you drank one cup of such wine and then another cup of such orange juice, then you should be in concern of pairs. Likewise, if you drank 2 cups of wine and the third cup was this diluted orange juice, that would be combination for good, taking your pairs and turning it into an odd number. And the reason for this is, even though they don't share commonality in terms of their flavor, but the fact that they've both been constituted in this manner, that gives it a combined element.
Doesn't that compete with the previous ruling that we discussed about one's a higher level?
Good question.
What takes precedence? Is it not precedence, but what dominates?
I think it's a qualifying factor. When we discussed earlier about wine combining to beer because it's of a higher stature rather than beer combining to wine because it's a lower stature, this statement must be a qualifier of that, presumably. And that is only true when there's no other reason to combine them. But if they're all constituted in this same manner, then that itself combines them together, giving them a certain equality. That's what it seems like. And so that's how Rashbam explains it. It's as if they are one kind because they all went through the same constitutional process, this Meziga process. I can't say much more than that, but other than what it says.
Thought.
No, good point. Very, very good point. Okay. Top of the Kuf Aleph Amud Aleph, top of 111a. Rabbi Huda is still speaking in the name of Shmuel and says, Chutz min hamayim, with the exception of water, that if one properly constituted water with other water, then it's not to be considered as similar to wine that's been constituted or some other drink that's been constituted. Now, why would you constitute water? Why would you constitute water with water? So Rashbam explains, Rashi explains, that if you had hot water and cold water, and you mix them together to create the proper temperature you want, so you've created a constitution, but this time not in different types, with one kind. So, meaning just water, just constituting its temperature.
But it's salty water and distilled water.
I can't tell you. I don't know.
No, I know.
So that says Rav Shmuel in the name of Yos, Rabbi Huda in the name of Shmuel, does not combine with other drinks. In other words, Meziga drinks that have been constituted, is only when you have one flavored liquid with water. Whereas in this case, you had 2 cups of water, even though there was a process of constitution, hot into cold or cold into hot. Nonetheless, because both elements are just plain water, it doesn't combine with the others, not for the good nor for the bad. Meaning if you had 2 cups of wine, having constituted water temperature-wise will not turn it into an odd. And if you had 1 cup of wine, having a constituted cup of water in terms of temperature afterwards will not combine to make it into a pair. This is the position of Shmuel being brought to us by Rabbi Huda. But Rabbi Yochanan disagrees. Rabbi Yochanan says, Afilu mayim, even constituted water counts as a valid constitution, even though it's the same kind, of the same element, it's the same material, both water, same liquid. But because you've constituted this water in terms of temperature, it will combine with the other drinks that have been constituted for flavor. Right? And Amar Papa explains, that when Rabbi Yochanan says that water can combine with other drinks if it's been constituted, as we just explained, is Ela Chamimi L'Goy Karidi, when you put hot water in the cold water to warm it up, the Karidi L'Goy Chamimi, and you put cold water into hot water to cool it down, then we consider that drink as having gone through the process of Meziga, constitution, and thus will combine. Meziga is like the noun, and thus will combine with the other Mezigas, the wine or the juice, whatever. Even though one's been constituted for temperature, one's been constituted for flavor.
You can't do that on Shabbos.
Sorry?
You can't do that on Shabbos.
Why not?
Because you're not supposed to cool water.
Only
water.
We talked about this on Shabbos, right? Only if you have, let's just assume we have a Lishi or whatever. Right? It also depends. Like, well, I don't want to go there. But yeah, we're going to continue discussing it on Shabbos this afternoon, actually, this week. I think. Yeah. But hot water into other hot water, and cold water into other cold water, that's not considered a meziga. It's not considered a constitutioning, tempering combination to combine with other drinks. Right? Yeah.
Doesn't undergo the same process.
It's correct. There's no. Yeah. Anyway, the floor is open to. So this is the last comment on the whole discussion of Zugais. Final comment. Now the Gemara goes on to other activities that invite negative spiritual energy.
We're done with Zugas.
But Zugas is done at this point. I read a half page forward.
How many
much more?
arguments did we discuss on Zugas? Make sure we have an odd number.
I just, the floor is open to understanding what this is. Why would tempering invite a combination between drinks, both to create zugos or to resolve zugos, turning 1 into 2 or 2 into 3? And what would be the question of what's at the root of the dispute here as to whether constitution is only in flavor or constitution is also in temperature? Now, I think, again, I'm thinking in terms of the way we've been understanding this the whole time, that zugos, pairs, are representative of conflict. You have an even number, so you have 2 people at a headlock. And the third is the resolving, right? The third, turning the even into the odd, is the resolution, right? We've quoted that the principle, last of the 12 principles that we read every morning, 2 verses that seem to contradict each other, and the third one comes to resolve the 2.
Hence the chord of 3 or chord of 23.
Correct. Always an odd number in a chord to come to resolution, to resolve between the conflicting opinions. So we're suggesting that zugos, pairs, is representative of conflict, and the third is to resolve. So what would be the meaning of tempering a drink in terms of flavor, tempering a drink in terms of temperature, and whether it combines or doesn't combine? So perhaps, you have 2 drinks, right? Non-tempered. 1 wine, 1 orange juice. So clearly there's no conflict here. 2 people have an opinion. One person's opinion is on a question of mathematics. The other person's an opinion on a question of
Welcome back.
Thank
I heard
you.
your voice. I couldn't believe it.
Good to see
It
you.
was a nice long vacation, huh?
Baruch Hashem. So one is opinion on math, let's say, and one's opinion on music. There's no conflict. We're not talking about the same thing. Right? We're on different places. But then when you add another element to the dispute, and then another element, that can invite now conflict. Right?
You mean like 2 orange juice versus 1 wine?
No, so 1 wine versus 1 orange juice, but now they've both been tempered with water.
Oh, that no, I was thinking of the
No.
issue,
Yes. I'm sorry.
Of,
Not the third one. No. If you introduce a common theme between these 2 opinions, now there could be a conflict.
Okay.
Even though they're coming from different places. Okay, music and math is not a good example, but let's just say philosophy and sociology, right? Someone's speaking philosophically and one's speaking sociologically. So in theory, you could say, look, there's no dispute here. They're talking about different things, but they're close enough that if you can add an element to each of their arguments that would bring it a commonality and thus make it into a conflict. How philosophy affects sociology and how sociology affects philosophy. Like they're close enough that with a little bit of commonality, they can turn into a conflict. I could be stretching myself here, but maybe. Follow what I'm saying or not really?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think. Maybe you can just pick one discipline, one of those, but have 2 diverging opinions about how it goes, how one person thinks about it, how another person thinks about it. But at the moment that and they're okay,
they're okay with each other because they're completely different.
Because they have different schools of thought.
Not just they're completely different realms. They're not drinking the same drink.
They have share a commonality that
now there's a possibility for conflict.
Yeah,
maybe. And then the third resolution has to come at it from the same perspective. And that is also ideally speaking from somewhere else, but shares that point of conflict in order to resolve it with them. Something of that nature. So it also has to be muzzled. Maybe. Or maybe we're saying something else. Similar lines. The dispute here is not outright in your face. But the dispute here is in subtlety. There's a certain element in which there's this conflict. It's a much more subtle dispute. It's not like 2 cups of wine where we're both talking about the same topic and we're outright arguing. We're not. We're talking about different topics. But subtly, there's a dispute in the way in which we look about something, the way in which we temper our arguments. So there's a subtlety in the dispute. So the person who's coming to resolve also has to have a subtlety in his resolution. Can't be outright in your face either. Right? Meaning the issue of Maziga representing subtlety. Because it's not outright, it's in the way you constitute it. Right? Maybe. Because if the third, sorry?
No, sorry.
Meaning if 2 people are arguing only on a subtlety, or in a subtle kind of way, and the person who comes to resolve is outright and open, you might actually just fan the flames of the dispute rather than resolve it. If the conflict presented before you is in a subtlety, then your solution also has to be in a subtlety. Maybe. I haven't fully fleshed this out, but I think Rabbi Yochanan's position, which is, follow what I was saying? Right? If I'm drinking wine and you're drinking orange juice, or if I'm drinking wine and then orange juice, right? So one is wine, one is orange juice. No tempering of water. Then we're on different topics. There's no dispute here. There's no conflict.
Right.
But then we both add water to our drinks, as it were. So there's a certain subtle element that does combine us to turn us into conflict.
It seems that
there's a subtlety. We're not outright dispute because one's wine. Despite the
properties
seeming,
of these 2 entities,
there's a subtlety
somehow there's a commonality between the 2 of
in a
them.
very subtle way.
They share a commonality.
Turning it into a conflict, which is only in the subtlety. It's only in the way we constitute it, the way we go about it. Right? Let's say we have different ways of
a conflict, meaning
yes, because
it joins as a pair.
It joins as a pair, turning it into a conflict.
That metaphorically or
turns
however means that there's a
conflict.
conflict.
But the conflict is very subtle.
Conflict it's odd because conflict usually comes about when you have what's the negative of commonality? Discommonality?
Yes, but
when people have things in common, then usually it's more about.
You have to have a commonality for disputes.
But you have to
otherwise, no conflict. We're talking about different places. We're talking about different things.
Right.
We're not in conflict. We're just talking at different. We're talking at different. I'll listen to what you're talking about because you're drinking orange juice, and you listen to what I'm talking about because I'm drinking wine. Whatever. We're talking about different things. But when there's a subtlety here, then it can invite argument even in disparate things because it's more subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Right. This subtleties in argument have a double-edged sword. On the one hand, a subtlety in a conflict, it's subtle, so it's not a big deal. We're not lockerheads. On the other hand, subtleties can actually spread thin over more disparate topics because it's subtle. It's not so overt. And therefore, the third cup, which comes to resolve, also has to have that subtlety. Otherwise, you actually might just blow the conflict up more. Right? So the resolving, the third cup also has to have a subtlety. Also has to be Maziga. Maybe. Again, it's suggesting. And I'm fleshing it out as I'm talking. Sorry, I'm fleshing it out as I'm talking as well. Trying to give an example of this. You know how especially in really close conflicts, right? You have between spouse, between siblings, between family, where you're having a discussion, but there's undertones in the discussion of something that's bothering you. And neither party is actually talking about it. They're talking about other things, seemingly, but there's a subtlety in there. There's something mixed in there that's an undercurrent that actually is a very subtle conflict. But if you touch it wrongly, you can blow up into a huge conflict. If you touch that subtle nerve, right? So there's an undertone of conflict. It's not outright, it's not overt. but there's an undercurrent of something that's there. And if you touch it wrong, it could really blow out of proportion. Right. So the one who's resolving, the third party, the third cup, also has to have that subtlety. To now have a subtlety resolve the issue without turning it into a bigger conflict. Right?
Yeah, water has that property.
That's right.
Has this, you call it subtle.
Who's right? It doesn't change the flavor.
It's subtle, right?
But it's right.
It has, like you said,
it doesn't change the
it's
substance.
an undercurrent. It's there.
Yeah. It doesn't change the
It
substance.
has potentiality.
It doesn't change the substance, it just changes how you digest it. Like the substance is the same. It's the same wine, the same flavor, but it changes how you take it in.
Levi, are we in different ball game if we, instead of mixing water with to dilute the wine, if we drink the wine straight and then we take a gulp of water?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be that doesn't count as
It's not the same ball game, eh?
No.
Probably
Okay.
catastrophic.
Yeah. Now, Rabbi Yochanan's position, I'm not clear on this. I'm fleshing it out as I'm talking to you. But something tells me that Rabbi Yochanan's position is a question of temperature, how heated the person is in debate.
Oh,
Right? It's hot and cold or cold and hot. Right? So when when you're resolving conflict, you also have to make sure that you have the right temperament and how passionate you are, how hot you are, how cold you are. And that itself that too is a meziga, is a constitution that you have to take into consideration. How heated are the people in dispute, and how heated are you in your resolution? Right? If you're too cold, you can't resolve. You're too hot, you also can't resolve. You have to have the right constitution to be able to resolve as a third party. That's what Rabbi Yochanan adds. Rabbi Yochanan adds that water and water could also be a third party, right? Only if he's properly tempered, if he's properly constituted. If he's hot water and cold water, but doesn't constitute the proper temperature, then either he's too passionate or he's too dispassionate. So you have to measure your passion, your heat versus cool, to match the original people who are in conflict, so that you can actually resolve it. If not, you either are underplaying it, too dispassionate, and the parties aren't going to listen to you, or you're too passionate and you're just going to ruin the whole thing. And now you're adding a whole element of heat, and you're just heating up the whole discussion. So you have to make sure your temperament, in terms of your temperature, matches the subtlety of the arguments, especially when it comes to subtle arguments. Because when they're subtle, that's when you really have to be tempered in terms of how passionate or dispassionate you are in talking about it, trying to resolve it. Because if you can end up, again, overblowing it out of proportion. It's a subtle dispute here. And if you're not subtle in your response, both in terms of being subtle in your response and how you talk, but also in terms of your temperament, how heated you are, how dispassionate you are, also it's got to be subtle to match the subtlety of the disputes in question. I'm fleshing this as I'm talking, but again, this is perhaps a suggestion in what this all might mean.
I have a suggestion.
Yeah, go ahead.
Water here signifies learning Torah.
Yeah.
So whenever you have divergent points of view on a topic in Torah, it could be very contentious, or it could be a way to become even more enlightened.
That's very good. I'll add to that.
Yeah.
So I'll add to that. That's very good.
Depends
So
on how they Hillel Shammai maybe is an example.
yeah, that's very good. So I'll tell you more. When it comes to Torah, so if one person's drinking wine, there's wine and there's juice without water, without Torah. There are two disparate topics.
There's nothing really.
One's mathematics, one's music. They're disparate topics. But once you put Torah into it, Torah is always going to be a unified theme. And a dispute in the question of the laws of damages can be related to how you look at the laws of marriage.
Here you have Yochanan and
right. But once you add water, then even two disparate topics can actually be related.
They will be.
They will be related because you added the water, you added Torah. If it's a question of civil law has nothing to do with criminal law. Right.
use
But if
Torah
it's
and
Torah,
Torah and criminal law.
Torah and civil law, Torah and criminal law, and Torah in how you bring a carbon in the temple can have a shared commonality, and thus either can be conflict or resolution. Very, very good. That's very good. So what would cold and hot water mean in that? It could be the same thing, how passionate you are in your Torah learning.
Passionate versus cold.
Yeah, cold learning Torah versus passionate learning Torah, and you have to make sure that temperament is correct when you're resolving.
Yeah.
Same, very, very good. Beautiful. Torah has that ability to take disparate topics or seemingly disparate topics and turn them into commonalities. The water
But then
making
what
the
do you
drinks.
do with the commonality?
And then the question is if it's conflict or resolution. But the water element turns it into a commonality, right? And then oftentimes we'll have a third area of Torah with water that can resolve the two.
That's how these two unseemingly
Unrelated issues become
commonality. You need that third one.
very good. Very, very good. Very good. Beautiful. Okay, tomorrow, God willing, we will continue to the next part of the discussion of the Gemara where it discusses other types of activities that invite negative spiritual forces with negative material consequences. A wonderful day, Yidden.